The gunshot that split the Montana air was as unexpected as the arrival of Colton Reed himself, a drifter whose shadow stretched long across the dusty main street of Whispering Pines in the summer of 1876. The town, like many that had sprung up in the wake of gold fever and cattle drives, had seen its share of hard men, but something about Colton's weathered face, and the way his hand rested casually near his holster, made even the saloon regulars pause in their revelry. Colton dismounted his chestnut mare with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent more years in the saddle than out of it. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust as he made his way toward the general store, his spurs jingling a melancholy tune that seemed to match the emptiness in his eyes. At 32, he'd already lived several lifetimes' worth of hardship, burying more friends than he cared to count and leaving behind whatever semblance of home he might have once had. New in town. The shopkeeper, a portly man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, eyed Colton with equal parts curiosity and caution. "Just passing through," Colton replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Need supplies. Ammunition, coffee, maybe something to read." The last request seemed to surprise even himself. The shopkeeper nodded, gathering the requested items. "You picked an interesting time to visit Whispering Pines, stranger. Town auctions happening tomorrow, all sorts of odds and ends up for grabs." Colton grunted noncommittally, counting out coins from a leather pouch that was growing alarmingly light. His funds were dwindling faster than he'd anticipated. The prospect of finding work, even temporary, crossed his mind. What kind of auction? He asked, not out of genuine interest but to fill the silence. The shopkeeper's expression shifted, uncomfortable now. "Well, mostly estate sales, abandoned property, but," he lowered his voice, "there's also the matter of the Sullivan place. Old man died last winter, left behind a peculiar situation." "Peculiar how?" "Left behind a girl. Foreign, they say, never speaks a word. Nobody knows what to do with her, so Judge Harmon decided she'd be sold as an indentured servant, legal enough in these parts for orphans and such." Colton's jaw tightened. Selling people isn't legal anywhere these days. Not selling, exactly, purchasing her labor for a fixed term. The shopkeeper didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. Besides, she's odd, hasn't said a word since they found her. "Some folks think she might be simple in the head." Colton paid for his supplies, his mind troubled. He'd seen enough injustice in his years roaming the frontier to last several lifetimes. The war between the states had supposedly settled the matter of human bondage, but out here in the territories, the line between civilization and barbarism remained perilously thin. That night, he took a room at the town's only boarding house, a two-story structure that had seen better days. Sleep evaded him as he stared at the water-stained ceiling, the shopkeeper's words echoing in his mind. By dawn, he'd made a decision that would alter the course of his solitary existence. The auction commenced at noon in the town square. Colton stood at the back of the crowd, observing the proceedings with mounting disgust. Household items, livestock, and parcels of land changed hands with brisk efficiency under the auctioneer's rapid-fire delivery. Then, a hush fell over the gathering as a young woman was led onto the makeshift stage. She couldn't have been more than 20, with copper-brown hair falling in waves past her shoulders. Her eyes, a striking shade of amber, remained fixed on the ground before her. Though clean, her simple blue dress had seen considerable wear. Her hands, bound loosely with a length of cord, trembled slightly, but her face remained expressionless. "Next item," the auctioneer announced, his voice booming across the square, 5 years indenture of this young woman. "Found at the Sullivan homestead. Healthy, strong, good for housework or farm labor, starting bid at $20, the crowd murmured. A few men raised their hands, calling out bids that made Colton's blood boil. 25, 30. The price climbed steadily as the auctioneer encouraged the bidders. $40. Do I hear 45? Colton stepped forward, his hand raised. $2.37, he called out, loud enough for all to hear. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Sir, the current bid is $40. "That's all I have," Colton replied evenly, holding the man's gaze. $2.37. "This isn't charity, mister," someone in the crowd jeered. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sir, if you can't meet the minimum bid, wait." Judge Harmon, a silver-haired man with cold eyes, stepped onto the platform. He whispered something to the auctioneer, who nodded reluctantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced, "Judge Harmon has reminded me that the purpose of this auction is to ensure the girl has proper guardianship, if there are no higher bids than $40. He paused, but the crowd had fallen silent. The novelty of the situation had dampened their enthusiasm. "Then the girl goes to Mr. Thompson for $40. Colton stepped closer to the platform. "That girl isn't property, she's a human being." Judge Harmon regarded him coolly. "The law allows for indenture contracts, especially for those unable to support themselves. Unless you can offer a better solution, I'll take her," Colton said firmly. "But not as a servant, as a free person in my employ. And how do you propose to pay for this arrangement?" Colton emptied his pouch onto the auctioneer's table. $2.37. "It's all I have." The judge's lips curved in a humorless smile. "You expect us to accept pennies for what's legally ours to dispose of." "I expect you to do what's right," Colton replied, his hand drifting closer to his holster. A tense silence fell over the square. Then, unexpectedly, Thompson, the $40 bidder, spoke up. "Let him have her. I was only bidding because my wife needs help with the children." "Wouldn't feel right now." Other voices joined in agreement. The spectacle had become uncomfortable for many of the townsfolk, who suddenly seemed eager for it to conclude. Judge Harmon's face flushed with anger, but he recognized the shifting mood of the crowd. "Fine," he snapped. $2.37. "She's your responsibility now, Mr. Reed, Colton Reed." The judge nodded curtly. "Mr. Reed, the girl is in your care. But understand this, if she becomes a burden on this town in any way, you'll answer for it." Colton collected his meager change, then approached the girl, who had remained motionless throughout the exchange. Up close, he could see faint freckles across her nose and the tight line of her compressed lips. He untied the cord around her wrists with gentle hands. "My name's Colton," he said quietly. "I don't own you. You're free to go wherever you want, but if you need a safe place, I can offer that." For the first time, her eyes lifted to meet his. There was intelligence there and wariness, but no gratitude. She made no sound, merely rubbed her wrists where the cord had been. "Do you understand me?" he asked. She gave a slight nod. "Do you have a name?" No response. "Belongings? Anything you need to collect?" Another small nod. "Lead the way, then." She turned and walked with surprising dignity through the dispersing crowd, Colton following a respectful distance behind. They made their way to a small cabin on the outskirts of town, where she gathered a modest bundle of clothing and a worn leather-bound book. As they left town that afternoon, Colton leading his mare with the girl walking silently beside him, he wondered what madness had possessed him. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, keeping to himself, surviving. Now he'd spent his last coins on a stranger who might never speak, might be running from troubles of her own, might even be dangerous. Yet something about her silent dignity had touched a place in him he'd thought long dead. Perhaps it was because he recognized a fellow wanderer, someone else who carried invisible scars. They made camp that evening by a stream, several miles from Whispering Pines. Colton hunted a rabbit for their supper, watching as the girl gathered firewood with efficient movements. She clearly knew how to survive in the wilderness, which only deepened the mystery surrounding her. As they sat by the fire, he tried again. "I need to call you something. Can you write your name?" She stared into the flames, giving no indication she'd heard him. "All right," he sighed. "I'll just call you Miss for now." That night, he gave her his bedroll and slept with his saddle as a pillow, his rifle within reach. Despite his exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every time he opened his eyes, he found her awake, staring at the stars with an unreadable expression. By morning, he'd formulated a plan. "There's a trading post about 3 days' ride from here," he told her over a breakfast of coffee and the remains of last night's rabbit. "I know the owner, honest man, might have work for both of us." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if assessing his intentions. Finally, she nodded once. They traveled together for those 3 days, settling into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Colton did the hunting and talked enough for both of them, sharing stories of his travels across the frontier. The girl remained silent but attentive, occasionally responding with gestures or expressions that grew more animated as her trust in him apparently increased. At night, he noticed her writing in the leather book she'd brought, using a stub of pencil. He didn't ask to see what she wrote, respecting the privacy that seemed so important to her. On the third day, they arrived at Richardson's trading post, a sturdy log building situated at a crossroads frequented by trappers, traders, and the occasional stagecoach. Bill Richardson, a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh, greeted Colton like an old friend. "Reed. Thought you might be dead by now." Richardson's eyes shifted to the girl. "And who might this be?" "She's traveling with me," Colton said simply. "We're both looking for work." Richardson's bushy eyebrows rose, but he asked no further questions. "Could use help around here. Spring shipments are coming in and my back ain't what it used to be. Got a cabin out back you can use." The arrangement proved beneficial for all parties. Colton handled the heavy lifting, inventory, and occasional security when rough characters passed through. The girl, whom Richardson took to calling Miss Mysterious, revealed a talent for organization and figures, helping to keep the trading post's books in better order than they'd ever been. Weeks passed, stretching into months. Summer faded into a glorious Montana autumn, painting the surrounding mountains with splashes of gold and crimson. The girl remained silent, but her expressions had become more animated, her gestures more elaborate. Colton found himself able to interpret her moods and simple needs without words. A raised eyebrow meant she was skeptical. A slight tilt of her head indicated curiosity. One evening in late September, they sat on the porch of their small cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky. Colton had taken to reading aloud in the evening's books borrowed from Richardson's small collection. Tonight it was Dickens, the words flowing into the peaceful twilight. "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times," he read, then paused, looking at her profile gilded by the fading light. "You know, I still don't know what to call you." She turned to him, her amber eyes reflecting the sunset. For a moment he thought she might actually speak. Instead, she reached for her leather book, opened it to a blank page, and carefully wrote a single word: "Katherine." "Katherine," he said, testing the name. "It suits you." She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face and caused something in Colton's chest to constrict. "Is there a last name that goes with that?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then wrote, "Valente, Katherine Valente," he said. "It's a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance." Her smile widened and she wrote again, "Thank you for saving me." "I didn't save you," he replied honestly. "I just offered an alternative." She shook her head emphatically and wrote, "You did not try to own me." Those simple words struck him deeply. In all his years of wandering, of fighting his own battles and minding his own business, he'd never considered himself anyone's savior. Yet this silent woman with her intelligent eyes saw something in him he hadn't recognized in himself. As autumn progressed, Colton found himself looking forward to their quiet evenings together. Katherine remained silent, but communicated more freely through writing. He learned she was 22, had come to America from Italy with her father 5 years earlier, and had ended up with Sullivan when her father died of pneumonia shortly after their arrival. Sullivan, an elderly widower, had treated her kindly but kept her isolated, perhaps out of some misguided sense of protection. "But why don't you speak?" Colton finally asked one evening. "Can you?" She took her time responding, filling nearly a page with her neat handwriting. When she handed him the book, he read, "I can speak. I choose not to. Words have brought me nothing but pain. My father made me promise to blend in, to become American, to forget our language and our ways. But English feels wrong on my tongue, and after he died, silence became my armor. No one can twist what I do not say." Colton read the words twice, understanding dawning. "Your silence protects you," she nodded, her eyes holding his. "No one can use your words against you if you don't give them any," he mused. "I understand that better than you might think." As winter descended on the mountains, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into a glittering wonderland, life at the trading post settled into a comfortable rhythm. The harsh weather meant fewer travelers, more time for repairs and improvements, and longer evenings by the fire. Colton found himself opening up to Katherine in ways he'd never done with anyone else. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, his service in the Union Army during the war, the nightmares that still plagued him. He spoke of his years drifting westward, taking odd jobs, avoiding attachments, trying to outrun memories that refused to fade. "I was running away," he admitted one snowy evening as they sat before the cabin's fireplace. "From the war, from responsibility, from feeling anything at all." Katherine wrote, and now he considered the question, watching the firelight play across her features. "Now I'm not sure. For the first time in years, I'm thinking about tomorrow instead of yesterday." She smiled at that, a gentle expression that made his heart beat faster. Then she wrote, "You saved my life. Now you are saving my soul." "I think it might be the other way around," he replied softly. The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Colton cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the way her hair gleamed in the firelight, of the delicate curve of her wrist as she closed her book. "It's getting late," he said, rising abruptly. "Good night, Katherine." He retreated to his side of the cabin, where a canvas partition provided a semblance of privacy. As he lay in his narrow bunk, listening to her quiet movements on the other side of the canvas, Colton confronted an uncomfortable truth. He was falling in love with a woman who had never spoken a single word to him. Christmas brought a brief thaw, both in the weather and in their cautious relationship. Richardson hosted a small gathering at the trading post, inviting the few year-round residents from nearby homesteads. Katherine helped prepare a feast that, while modest by Eastern standards, felt luxurious after months of simple fare. Colton watched her move among the guests, communicating with gestures and smiles, accepted without question by the frontier folk who were more concerned with a person's character than their peculiarities. She wore a dress of deep green that Richardson's wife had helped her alter, and with her hair arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, she looked transformed. "She's a special one," Richardson commented, joining Colton by the punch bowl. "You thinking of making it official?" Colton nearly choked on his drink. "What? You and Miss Katherine, been watching you two dance around each other for months now." Richardson's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Life's short out here, Reed, especially for those of us foolish enough to choose it. Grab happiness when you can." Later that evening, walking back to their cabin through the snow, Colton found the courage to offer Katherine his arm. She took it, her gloved hand resting lightly in the crook of his elbow. The moon was nearly full, casting the snow-covered landscape in silver light that made everything look enchanted. Otherworldly, at their doorstep, she paused, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Before he could speak, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a feather-light kiss to his cheek, then slipped inside, leaving him standing in the moonlight, his heart pounding like a youth's. January brought the harshest weather of the season. Blizzards howled down from the mountains, forcing them to remain indoors for days at a time. They played chess with a set Richardson had loaned them, and developed a sign language of their own, supplemented by Katherine's written notes. One particularly bitter night, with the wind screaming around the cabin like a living thing, Colton woke to the sound of movement. Katherine stood by the fireplace, adding logs to the dying embers, her slender form silhouetted against the growing flames. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice rough with slumber. She turned, shaking her head. In the firelight, he could see tear tracks on her cheeks. "What's wrong?" He was beside her in an instant, concern overriding propriety. She reached for her book, but her hands were trembling too much to write clearly. Instead, she pointed to her throat, then to her heart, her expression desperate. "Your silence is hurting you," he guessed. She nodded, fresh tears spilling. "Katherine," he said gently, taking her cold hands in his. "Whatever you're afraid of, whatever happened in your past, you're safe here. With me, I would never hurt you, never judge you." She searched his face, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. Then, to his astonishment, she spoke, her voice hoarse from disuse but musical nonetheless, with the faintest trace of an accent. "I am tired of being afraid." 5 simple words, but they struck Colton with the force of a physical blow. He stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Your voice," he finally managed. "It's beautiful." She gave a small, self-conscious laugh. "It is rusty, like an old gate." "No," he insisted. "It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." She blushed, dropping her gaze. "I have wanted to speak to you for so long, but fear became a habit." "What changed?" he asked softly. "You did," she replied simply. "You showed me that not all men seek to control. That kindness can exist without conditions, that there are still good souls in this world." Without thinking, Colton reached out to brush a tear from her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I have been listening to your voice for months," she continued. "Learning the rhythm of your words, the cadence of your stories. I felt I knew your soul before I knew your name." "Katherine," he breathed, hardly daring to believe what was happening. "When you paid those pennies for me," she said, "you did not know it, but you bought yourself a second chance. And you gave me one too." The fire crackled in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within their small shelter, something precious and fragile was taking root. "May I kiss you?" Colton asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. In answer, Katherine rose on tiptoe, framing his face with her slender hands. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, expressing months of unspoken longing. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I have loved you since you untied my hands and told me I was free." "I love you too," he replied, the words coming easily now that they'd been released. "I think I've loved you since the first time you smiled at me." They stayed by the fire until dawn, talking, Katherine's voice growing stronger with each passing hour. She told him of her childhood in a small village near Florence, of her mother's death when she was 12, of her father's decision to seek a new life in America. She spoke of the journey across the ocean, of the sickness that had claimed so many of their fellow passengers, of the bewildering vastness of the new country. "Papa believed America would give us a fresh start," she explained, "but he never recovered from the voyage. He was always coughing, always tired. By the time we reached Montana territory, he could barely stand." "How did you end up with Sullivan?" Colton asked, stroking her hair as she leaned against his chest. "Papa worked for him briefly, cutting wood. When Papa died, Mr. Sullivan offered me shelter. He was kind in his way, lonely. He spoke to me as if I understood everything, even when I did not. I learned English by listening to him read his Bible aloud each night." "But you chose not to speak," she nodded. "At first it was grief, then fear of this strange new place, then—" She hesitated. "After Mr. Sullivan died, men came. They spoke of selling me of my value. I pretended not to understand. I thought if they believed me simple, they might leave me be." "Instead, they put you up for auction," Colton said grimly. "Yes, but then you came." She turned in his arms to face him. "With your pennies and your angry eyes," he chuckled at her description. "I wasn't planning to stay in that town more than a night. Something made me go to that auction. Fate, maybe, or love," she suggested softly. "Perhaps love recognized itself before we did." As winter gradually relented its grip on the mountains, Katherine spoke more freely each day. Richardson and the other regular visitors to the trading post were startled at first by her transformation, but soon adjusted to the new reality. Her accent, slight but noticeable, added a musical quality to her speech that Colton found endlessly enchanting. In April, with the first wildflowers beginning to dot the meadows, Colton proposed. They were fishing at a nearby stream, enjoying the warm spring sunshine after the long winter. "I don't have much to offer," he admitted, holding her hands in his. "No land, no fortune, just my heart and my promise to love you for all my days." "That is more than enough," she replied, tears of joy shimmering in her amber eyes. "My heart has been yours since you gave me back my freedom." They were married in May, with Richardson officiating in his capacity as the region's justice of the peace. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by the handful of settlers who had become their friends over the past year. Katherine wore a simple white dress that she and Richardson's wife had sewn together, with wildflowers woven into her copper-brown hair. Colton, in a new shirt and his least-worn trousers, looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. "I, Colton Reed, take you, Katherine Valente, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice strong and clear. "To have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts us." When it was her turn, Katherine's voice rang out without hesitation. "I, Katherine Valente, take you, Colton Reed, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts us." As Richardson pronounced them husband and wife, Colton kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic observers. In that moment, surrounded by the majestic mountains and the new green of spring, it seemed that all the hardships of their past lives had been merely preparation for this joy. That summer, they made a decision. With their combined savings from working at the trading post, they purchased a small parcel of land in a fertile valley about 10 miles away. Richardson, sad to lose his best workers but happy for their future, helped them acquire materials for a cabin of their own. By autumn, they had established a modest homestead. Colton, applying skills he'd picked up in his years of wandering, proved adept at farming and animal husbandry. Katherine planted a vegetable garden and began teaching English to the children of newly arrived immigrants, her own experience making her an empathetic instructor. Their first child, a daughter they named Maria after Katherine's mother, was born the following spring. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's copper hair, and from her earliest days, she was surrounded by the sound of both English and Italian, Katherine having reclaimed her native language with pride. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, William, named for the friend who had first brought them together, Bill Richardson. By then, their homestead had expanded to include a small orchard, a flock of chickens, and a reputation for hospitality that brought regular visitors to their door. On the 5th anniversary of the day Colton had paid his pennies for Katherine's freedom, they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. "Did you ever imagine we would have this?" Katherine asked, leaning her head against her husband's shoulder. "Never," he admitted, his arm tightening around her. "I spent so many years believing I didn't deserve happiness that the best I could hope for was to keep moving to outrun my ghosts. And now." He turned to look at her, this woman who had transformed his life with her silence and then with her words. "Now I know that sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms. You saved my soul, Katherine Reed. You gave me a reason to stop running." She smiled, the same smile that had first captured his heart by the light of a campfire years ago. "And you gave me back my voice. We saved each other." As twilight deepened into night, they called the children in for supper. Later, with Maria and William tucked into bed, Katherine and Colton stood in the doorway of their home, arms around each other, gazing at the stars that spangled the vast Montana sky. "I love you," she whispered, the words no less powerful for having been said countless times before. "I love you too," he replied, marveling at how 3 simple words could contain such depth of feeling in the silence that followed a comfortable silence. Chosen rather than imposed, they shared the unspoken understanding of 2 souls who had found in each other not just love, but redemption. From pennies and silence, they had built a life rich beyond measure, proof that even in the wild, untamed spaces of the frontier, the human heart could find its home.